all you beautiful people out there. How y'all doing today? That is fantastic. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Diesel Sports Podcast, the podcast where we talk everything National Football League in season off, season it. Doesn't matter because it's football. I am your host, Double Diesel, and welcome to the show today where we are recapping Week 16, Christmas week of the 2022 National Football League season. Before we continue with the show, I'd like to ask, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share the video if you enjoy this content or you know someone who does enjoy this content. Really helps boost my exposure, get me out there to more viewers, more eyes. That would mean the absolute world to me if you do so. Also, if you haven't already, go follow me on Twitter at DDS_pod. And also, if you haven't already and you'd like to, go follow me and support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Double Diesel Sports. On there, you will get exclusive content such as my weekly picks I do every single week in the NFL season, as well as some of my draft content that I will be starting on very, very soon in the off season. On there, you will get exclusive content such as team-specific mock drafts, access to my big board, etc., etc. We're still a month or two away from getting fully into that, but we are getting very, very close to it, and I'm super excited to start doing that. So if you haven't already and you'd like to, go support me on Patreon. The links to that will be in the description down below. But let's get on with the show. First of all, have a merry belated Christmas to everyone out there. Hope you've had a very fun and safe Christmas. I certainly did. This was a great year for Christmas for me. Got to spend some time with some of my family members down in Florida for a week. Hence why I was gone for an entire week there. But yeah, we also had some great, really great, interesting storylines that have come out of this week. A lot of which have come out from Christmas Day specifically. But before we get into that, I want to talk about a couple things that happened before and after Christmas Day. The first being something that occurred after Christmas Day, and that is on Twitter, on the personal Twitter account of JJ Watt. He posted a picture of him with his wife and their child, talking about how this was his child's first NFL game, and it's also going to be his last NFL home game, thus officially announcing that once the season is concluded, J.J. Watt will officially be hanging up the cleats and putting an end to what has been an illustrious Hall of Fame career. I've been a football fan since I was 12 years old, so 2012 was when I first became a football fan. So I've watched J.J. Watt throughout the entirety of his 12-year career, almost, aside from his rookie year in 2011. But here you have a guy who was drafted 11th overall out of Wisconsin to the Houston Texans, booed on draft day by Texan fans. I don't know if you remember that. There are videos of it on YouTube of local Houston news stations showing video of draft parties and Texans fans booing the pick of J.J. Watt. Why? Even at the time they booed it, I have no idea. But it looks even worse in hindsight, considering every single one of those fans have, in some degree, or have had 99 jerseys. Because he has become, without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest player in the short-lived history of the Houston Texans. You're talking about one of three players in league history to be a three-time Defensive Player in the Year in a club that only has Lawrence Taylor and Aaron Donald in it. Ironically, two of those members wore 99, which I just realized. But here's a guy who, at the top of his career, you're talking between 2014 to 2016 around, you're talking about a guy who was the definition of unstoppable. Imagine what Aaron Donald is now Like, everyone sees that Aaron Donald is the dominant force that he is, where you can have him blocked by 2, 3 guys and he can still get consistent pressure. JJ Watt was that on the edge, and I don't think because he's kind of fallen off these last couple of years, because he's been so riddled with injuries in the latter half of his career, that I think a lot of people forgot just how dominant JJ Watt truly was at the height of his career. You're talking about a guy who, before the injuries that he's had, was on pace to break Bruce Smith's all-time sack record. He was on pace to do that. I think he had, what? I could be mistaken when I say this. I think he had like at least 2 seasons where he had at least 20 sacks or so. Let me look this up real quick. Hold on one moment. I should have had this pulled up, but yeah, he had 2 seasons where he had at least 20 sacks, and he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons where he had at least double-digit sacks. This is a man who was unstoppable in Houston. The definition of a game record. The definition of a guy who worked his ass off to get to where he was. And he's one of the few future Hall of Famers that I think his reputation got better as a result of being on Hard Knocks. And what I mean by that is everyone knew he was a dominant player and he worked his ass off. But I think everyone's seen the clip from Hard Knocks when the Texans did Hard Knocks in 2016, I want to say, of him late night, hours after practice, in the dark, doing swim move drills and block shedding moves on a tackle dummy, on a shed, just doing those drills over and over again. Now, I don't know how long he was there for, but my guess it was pretty long ass time. And that was sort of a glimpse into the dedication that this man had throughout his career. The dedication to be great, the dedication to being a dominant force, the dedication he had to the game, to winning, the dedication he had to the city of Houston. And I haven't even talked about all the acts he's done for the city of Houston. When Hurricane Harvey hit Houston back in, 2017, 2018-ish? When that hurricane came through Houston and devastated the city, he was not only one of the main contributors to helping rebuild the city and helping out families, he was one of the forefront leaders of that. And that just showed the love he had for the city of Houston, the love he had for caring for people, the love he had for he's the definition of just a giant huggable teddy bear in that regard. A teddy bear that scared the shit out of offensive linemen, but a teddy bear nonetheless. And he has rightfully earned the respect of his peers, the respect of fans, the respect of everybody he has ever encountered with, the respect of everybody who has ever seen him play, that has ever seen him do these acts both on and off the field. He is the definition of a gamer, the definition of somebody who we should all aspire to be and all want to be. If everyone in the world went about life and treated people the way J.J. Watt does, the world would be such an incredible place to live. And he will be missed in the realm of football. I wish him the best in retirement. He has earned this retirement. His body has earned this retirement. And there are going to be very few players that I think will ever be that will have the impact on an organization, on a league, both on and off the field, the way J.J. Watt had throughout the entirety of his 12-year career. So, happy retirement, brother. You earned it. And I'll see you in Canton one of these days. Now, on to the actual football side of it. Before we get into the Christmas Day craziness, I want to talk about one more thing until we get into that. There's a story that was being talked about all throughout the entirety of the weekend and even still now. Zach Wilson. You know what? I'm gonna save it for a second, because I want to talk about this Jags Jets game, and I want to talk about the positives because I try and be optimistic about a lot of things. So I'm gonna talk about this game. I'm gonna talk about the Jags' perspective on this first. What a midseason turnaround the Jacksonville Jaguars have had. Everyone's talking about the Detroit Lions and the turnaround they've had, and rightfully so. But don't sleep on the Jaguars. They're a team that they started out hot. They started out with 2-1. Then they suffered that huge losing streak, like 5 or 6 game losing streak immediately after that. And then they just it was like, all right, well, they're reverted back to the Jags of old. But this last month and a half, they've started to figure things out. The offense has started to figure things out. Trevor Lawrence has asserted himself as the true franchise quarterback of this Jags team that really throughout its history, outside of what maybe Mark Brunell, has never really had. I don't even think David Garrard, as great as he was, never gave this Jags team a real semblance of the long-term viable option that's going to get us somewhere. Trevor Lawrence has given this team an avenue to think, hey, we can legitimately compete. And we can legitimately compete with the right pieces around them, with the top dogs of not just the AFC, but in the NFL. And it's been so fun watching this team. And coming into the year, they were the biggest, we don't know what the hell's going on with them team, strictly because of how much the Urban Meyer error, that's ERROR, truly was. Because we all witnessed it, we all heard the stories of the dysfunction within that organization under Urban Meyer. So we had no idea what kind of Jags team we were going to get this year, with Doug Peterson now being under the realm, a Super Bowl winning head coach, yes, but left Philadelphia on some pretty bad terms for the most part. And I might, as well as a few others, criticize the hiring of Doug Peterson over someone like a Byron Leftwich, which looking back on that is crazy to think about, but over someone like an Eric Bieniemy, over someone like a Brian Daboll, and you went with Doug Peterson. At the time, I was just like, why? Out of all the options you could have had, why Doug Peterson? Well, now you're seeing why Doug Peterson, because he has been able to right this ship in a way that I don't even think the most optimistic of Jags fans were expecting. And this team, all of a sudden, this team's rise late in the year has managed to perfectly correspond with the complete collapse of the Tennessee Titans. This is a Titans team that I think was 7-3 at one point, have suffered a 5-game losing streak, and that perfectly corresponded with this great uptick of the Jacksonville Jaguars, to the point where now, even though they're 7-8, they're now sitting in first place of the AFC South with complete control over their own destiny. And now you're at the point where a Jags team that was still young, still learning to play winning football, who was written off at the middle of the season, now all of a sudden has a chance to not only play in the playoffs, but to have a home playoff game. It's an amazing turnaround, and it's something that, like I said, everyone was talking about the Detroit Lions, and rightfully so, but don't forget about the Jaguars, because they're a team the way they're playing right now, not only can play a home playoff game, they're probably good enough to win a playoff game or two. Like, they're kind of like what the Lions are, where you just look at them and you're like, they're not like a real threat to win the Super Bowl, but at the same time, no one wants to play them in the playoffs, at least in my eyes. So, wanted to start this off by giving my props to the Jacksonville Jaguars. But now let's talk about the thing that everyone's talking about coming out of this game. I put out on Twitter after this game on Thursday night, I said that I posed a question to one of my inspirations to do YouTube, that franchise guy. If you haven't subscribed to him, go check him out. He does incredible content over there. I posed a question to him on Twitter asking if Zach Wilson should take the Terrell Pryor / Logan Thomas route and change positions in order to be successful in the NFL. And I posed that question because we kind of saw it all year, and we saw it on Thursday night especially. And Thursday night was really the night where I look at Zach Wilson and I watch him play quarterback, and I'm like, he doesn't even look like he's an NFL quarterback. And it's so mind-boggling to me, because I obviously didn't grow up during the Ryan Leaf era in San Diego. I wasn't a fan of football during the Jamarcus Russell age in Oakland. So I've never really experienced truly in the moment of what a true, like, all-time horrible draft bust really is. I mean, I've had the Johnny Manziels and stuff like that, but you're talking about a guy who was taken 22nd overall. You're talking Zach Wilson, who was the consensus second overall pick, a guy who everyone was saying that if it weren't for Trevor Lawrence being in his same draft class, he would be the undisputed number one quarterback in that class. I was saying that, and I wasn't alone. This was not a situation where it's like Joe Douglas was like enamored with Zach Wilson, and everyone else was like, oh, those foolish Jets. Everyone was in agreement that Zach Wilson was the number 2 overall pick in that draft. Everybody. So, everybody saw the talent. We all saw the talent at BYU. We all saw the talent on his pro day. You know, after Thursday, like, the clips from his pro day have been circling around as, like, because, like, you watched his pro day, and it's like, my God, the throws he was making in his pro day were just, it made your jaw drop. They were just like, how can somebody be that physically gifted? But instead, they've been circling around in recent days, sort of as like a cautionary tale of, don't draft a guy based off his pro day. Because that's kind of what it's turned into, is like the New York Jets, everyone else, including myself and the New York Jets and a lot of teams in the NFL, fell in love with Zach Wilson and his potential because of what he showed at his pro day. And the National Football League is more than just having a great pro day. It's more than just making a crazy off-balance throw, going to your left and throwing it back across your body to your right, 60 yards down the field. It's more than that. You have an offensive lineman in front of you. You have edge rushers coming at you. You have safeties that are 60 yards down the field past that point that you're throwing the football to. You have 11 guys on the defense that you're going against. Like, there's just so much more to it than just making a great throw. There's so much more to playing quarterback in the National Football League than just having a great arm and having great mobility and having great physical talent. It's more than that. And I get Josh Allen was kind of the same way coming out of Wyoming. Patrick Mahomes was kind of the same way. But those guys understood and learned how to play quarterback. And at least then, like, everyone's saying, like, well, Josh Allen was kind of like the same way. The difference was with Josh Allen, he had the support of his teammates in his second year. And, like, he was in a similar situation. Like, Josh Allen was in a similar situation as Zach Wilson is, where he was the quarterback in his second year on a really good Bills team that made the playoffs. And the difference, though, is that Josh Allen had the support of his teammates, and Josh Allen, even though he was not this great quarterback by any means in his second year, he had shown signs of development from year 1 to year 2, which in turn allowed his teammates to have faith and trust in him. And then we saw in year 3, that's when he exploded, and now he's arguably the best quarterback in the NFL as a result. The problem is Zach Wilson hasn't shown that. He hasn't shown any improvement in the weaknesses that he had in his game coming out of BYU. And in fact, the strengths he had in his game are actually starting to regress. One thing that people really praised him on was his decision making. And, like, people saw at BYU that he was kind of a football junkie, where he was doing things that you didn't see a college quarterback doing, like looking off the safety and seeing what the defense was doing before the ball was snapped. People praised him for that at BYU. And yet in the NFL, he hasn't, not only has he not shown an ability to do that, but he's actually regressed in that regard. And that could be a confidence thing. I think it is absolutely a confidence thing. And playing in New York City after playing for 3 or 4 years in Provo, Utah, and then playing in New York City in the bright lights and the media is constantly on you 24/7, it is a culture shock. Going from Utah to New York, it is a massive culture shock. And it's a culture shock that I don't think he was ever equipped to handle. And you're starting to see that. You saw it during the infamous post-game presser after the second New England game, where he was asked point blank, do you think you let the defense down? And without skipping a beat, he said no. And I don't think he's been equipped to handle the New York pressure, the New York media, New York as a whole. I don't think he was equipped for it. Now, would he be having these issues had he went to a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, to a team like the Houston Texans, to somewhere like even a Seattle or even like a New Orleans? Or even just look at the QB needy teams in his draft class. Would he be under the same kind of pressure in Chicago? Maybe, maybe not. Would he have had the same kind of pressure in San Francisco? Probably not. Now, New England is a different story. And by the way, that's another thing I want to talk about is like everyone also kind of ripping on Mac Jones for regressing drastically in his second year. I was taking consideration with Mac Jones. Here's the difference between Zach Wilson and Mac Jones. Mac Jones is in a situation where his offensive coordinator is a defensive coordinator, and he's getting handicapped as a result of that. And he doesn't have the greatest talent around a receiver-wise. And, it's kind of, you're seeing like when he has a bad coach calling plays, he looks like a bad quarterback as a result. And he's given people benefit of the doubt because we saw in his rookie year, when he actually had a real offensive coach, he was not only the best rookie quarterback by far, but he was good enough to earn a Pro Bowl honor. Granted, as an alternate, but he was still deemed good enough to be in that position. And so he's kind of earned the benefit of the doubt of, okay, well, let's give him a real offensive coach for 2023, see how he performs, and then we can make a proper assessment on him. Zach Wilson not only has not given anybody a reason to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he's in a situation where, saying what you were, no one's ever really said the greatest things about Mike LaFleur, but he's still a decent offensive coach. He has better talent around him. Garrett Wilson is an absolute stud. Elijah Moore, I really like Elijah Moore when they actually give him the fucking football. Breece Hall getting injured really hurt this team offensively. But even then, you still have good running backs in Michael Carter. And this defense is a top 5 unit. Undeniable. And they have great coaching. Robert Saleh is a great coach. He's in a good situation on a team that's ready to compete and win now. So how is it that you're in a better situation than the majority, and you have the better supporting cast and surrounding situation than a majority of the quarterbacks in your draft class? And yet you look like the worst out of all of them. Like, he has a better surrounding cast than Trevor Lawrence. He has a better surrounding cast than Justin Fields for sure. He has a better surrounding cast than Mac Jones. And yet he's the worst out of all of them. It doesn't make sense. And that's why, and I look at this and he's overthrowing guys on screen passes, short arming throws, throwing wild passes deep down the field to nobody, throwing balls directly to DBs, and they get dropped by the defensive backs because the DB is probably just not expecting the ball getting thrown straight to him. He should have had 2 picks on Thursday night because they were thrown straight to Darius Williams, and he dropped it, probably both of them, probably because he just wasn't expecting him to get thrown straight to him. And I just watch all this, and especially considering that he got benched in that game, Chris Streveler, CFL legend Chris Streveler, gets put in, who was elevated that day from the practice squad, comes in, first drive, and gets the offense more yards on that one drive than the Jets offense had the entire game up to that point under Zach Wilson. That, to me, shows that, A, he's lost the locker room. And you've heard guys all week talking about, who have played in the NFL, saying they have never once seen a guy who's lost the locker room win it back, ever. So it shows he's lost the locker room. And B, it shows that he is not fit to be an NFL quarterback right now. And I even hesitate to say he's even fit to be a backup. And that's why I posed the question of, should he change positions if he's going to be successful in this league? Because, and yes, some guys take longer than others, but when your stat line through your first 2 years is almost identical to that of Jamarcus Russell's, in fact, Jamarcus Russell actually had a better touchdown-interception ratio than Zach Wilson did up to this point. Actually, Jamarcus Russell actually edges out Zach Wilson in certain categories. But when that's what you look like, it raises the question of, should a position change be coming into consideration? A change of scenery and a change of position, in my eyes, is probably the only way I see Zach Wilson having a salvageable career in the National Football League. Might be too harsh. He might go to another team and have much better success as a quarterback there. But I just watch him play, and I look at his mechanics, and I look at what he's doing on the field, and I just there's no way. There's no way that I can see him being a viable option as a starter in this league. I just can't. And you could point to all the physical traits you want. You could point to the pro day throws all you want. He just doesn't look like he's an NFL quarterback whatsoever. It's just where I stand. Now, let's dive into Christmas Day. There were 3 games that occurred on Christmas. All 3 were entertaining in their own way. First, I want to talk about Green Bay, Miami. Now, Green Bay, they're still alive. They're still kicking and screaming, man. And it's funny how Aaron Rodgers is kind of dragging this team kicking and screaming to a respectable record at the end of the year, considering what this team looked like in October and around the midseason. This was a bad football team in the middle of the season. And yet they've seemingly have found ways to win as of late and turn things around. And I think a big part of that has been Aaron Rodgers figuring some stuff out and the growth and development of Christian Watson and these younger receivers that are finally now starting to gain Aaron Rodgers' trust. Because you saw at the beginning of the year, he didn't trust these guys. And now you're starting to see that growth and development, Christian Watson especially. And it's just so fascinating to see this team where it wasn't in the middle of the season to where they are now, to where they're now in a legitimate spot. And what helped them out is they won on Sunday, and all the other teams that are ahead of them lost. The Giants lost, the Commanders lost, the Lions lost, the Panthers, no, not the Panthers. The Panthers won, but who else lost? Seahawks lost. All the teams that are ahead of them in the playoff race lost, and they won. So now, all of a sudden, a team that was written off even just 2 weeks ago is now right back in the thick of it. And they're now in a legitimate spot where they can absolutely sneak in as a 7th seed. They have a great opportunity to do that. So this is why I always say you can't write teams off in the middle of the season or at the beginning of the season, because December still exists and crazy shit happens in the month of December, and it takes the playoff format to a foregone conclusion to scrambled eggs, essentially. It just, you spin the wheel, it's like, well, what crazy unpredictable shit's gonna happen in this month? So that's kind of what it is. And the Packers they're the slot that the wheel fell on of, you're the team that's going to sneak into the postseason somehow. And who knows? Maybe they still get unlucky and they still miss out on the playoffs. But just the fact that they're still alive and still competing, and they have a legitimate hope that a lot of teams that are still alive in the playoff hunt don't have. It's incredible to watch. Really, it is. Now, as far as the Miami Dolphins go, they were a team that they were a team that making the playoffs almost felt like a foregone conclusion. And yet here they are staring at a 4-game losing streak, and their starting quarterback's not going to be playing this week against New England. And that may or may not be a good thing, because Tua has not been playing good these last 4 games. He played well against Buffalo, but 3 out of these 4 losses, he has not played well. He's played terrible in the game against the Chargers on Sunday Night Football. Who was the first team they lost to in this? Oh, gosh. I forgot who it was. It was the Niners, right? He played terribly in that game against the Niners, which, like I said, we gave him an excuse because up to that point it was one bad game and you're playing against the best defense in football. We gave him a pass. But the Chargers game was really the game where we looked at and was like, okay, something's something's not right with Tua. Something he's regressing all of a sudden. And he played well against Buffalo, but it wasn't enough. They still lost. And then you get to this game. He played well for the first 3 quarters, and then the fourth quarter, he just became interception poppy. And they were bad interceptions. He threw 3 picks, and I want to say all of them were in the fourth quarter, at least in the second half. And I sort of put out on Twitter that was like, oh God, like late season Tua is starting to rear his ugly head again. And it hurts more if you're a Dolphins fan because you thought that Tua was gone. The Tua that you saw the first 2 years in the league, you thought he was gone. And yet here he is starting to rear his ugly head again. And it's now gotten to the point where he is, in a way, the main culprit as to why they lost 4 straight games in a lot of ways. Because you can't be making boneheaded decisions like that. You can't be throwing picks straight to defensive backs when you have yet to clinch a playoff spot. And now, because the Chargers beat the Colts, there's now only one wild card spot up for grabs now. And it's that 7th spot. There's one spot, and you have all these teams vying for it. And the Dolphins still hold it. They're still in control of their own destiny. But all of a sudden, them getting a playoff spot, which went from inevitable, has now transformed into fingers crossed. Like, it's not a guarantee anymore. And you're playing against New England, and they're still just on the outside looking at it, even though that's a team that you look at and you're like, this team does not deserve to be in the playoffs whatsoever. And yet they're still alive because the Dolphins are just shooting themselves in the foot constantly, week after week, all of a sudden. And it's kind of sad to watch in a lot of ways. So I don't know what you do. Tua's back in concussion protocol, and he's probably a no-go for Sunday against New England. And which, by the way, that all of a sudden turned into a much bigger game than I think we thought it was going to be. But we'll just have to wait and see, really. I don't really know what else to say on that. It's just, it's turning into a collapse of drastic proportions, and it's sad. And I feel bad for Dolphins fans because, like I said, you thought the old Tua was gone, and now he's starting to creep back up again and costing this team critical games late in the year. That was why so many people were low on him in his first 2 years, was because he played fine the first half, and then you get into December, and then he would just completely implode, and he would take the team down with it. So that's all I really got to say on that. Now, the next game that happened on Christmas was a game that I watched on Nickelodeon. I watched the Nickelodeon stream on this, and thank God I did, because that made this game so much more entertaining, because this was not a good football game. This was a game between 2 4-10 teams that had so much expectations coming into the year and have completely imploded in one way or another. In the Rams' case, it was all their star players got hurt, and it exposed the fact that this team had 0 depth. And in the case of the Denver Broncos, it was the 2 guys they brought in that they thought were going to be the missing pieces to take this team over the top, ended up making this team worse as a result. Now, I want to talk about this game because the Rams won 51 to 10, I think it was. Yeah, 51 to 10. And we had a Christmas Day 50 burger, and it was brutal to watch. Had it not been for the Nickelodeon broadcast, this would have been viewed as much more brutal, at least for my view and experience of it. But in the case of the Rams, great win on Christmas, feel-good win. Baker still looks rejuvenated. He looks like a changed man. like I said, he's earned his spot as a starter somewhere else. Where, we don't know yet, but he's definitely earned the right to be a starting quarterback elsewhere. Now, in the case of the Broncos, like I said, there's not much to talk about the Rams' perspective of things. Like, great win. Baker looked great. Hey, nothing else you can say on that. But for the Denver Broncos, just when you think it can't get any lower, you are then reminded that it is a bottomless pit. And we always get fooled that, oh, it's not a bottomless pit, that we finally hit the bottom. Nope, it keeps going deeper. And you look at this Broncos team this year. We saw them play the Thursday night game against the Colts. And you see them play week in, week out, and how anemic they look offensively. And yet, despite all that, this was probably the worst. This, honest to God, was probably the worst game I saw this Broncos team play all year. And that's saying a lot, because I felt like I've said that 3 times already this year. But this was legitimately the worst. Because it was back on national television in front of a global audience on Christmas Day on 2 different networks. And it was the worst I've seen this Broncos team look all year. And it resulted in a belated Christmas gift for Broncos fans in that their head coach, Nathaniel Hackett, was fired the day after this game. Now, in that regard, he was not the right guy to lead this ship. You saw it. You saw the leaked footage from the sideline of players fighting with each other, yelling at each other, how this team just looked like a complete walking corpse. This team was lost. This team was just stuck in just misery and failure. And he was not the right. And it was like, while all this was going on all year, this has gone on all year. And yet, during all of it, Nathaniel Hackett always just seemed to be looking in the opposite direction of it all. And it was clear to everyone he was not the right guy to lead this ship, and so did ownership. And they decided to not even wait the last 2 games of the year to axe him. They felt like 2 more weeks of this was not necessary, and they just cut their losses now. Now, firing Nathaniel Hackett Nathaniel Hackett was not the only problem here. And everyone's watched this team has noticed that he was not the only problem here. And there's multiple problems with this team. For one, it's the guy you're paying $245 million to. And I've said everything I felt like I needed to say about Russell Wilson. But when you're getting roasted on TV by Patrick Starr, that is as low can go. And by the way, and I didn't realize this until Sunday. Did you know that heading into Christmas Day, Russell Wilson, actually no, I could say it like this. Did you know that after this week, Russell Wilson has the exact same amount of bathrooms in his home as touchdown passes on the year? He has 12 touchdown passes on the year and 12 bathrooms in his home. First of all, why do you need that many bathrooms? That's number one. You don't need that many fucking bathrooms in your home in any circumstance. And 2, it just is another stat and another line to show how pathetic this year is and how much of a drop-off Russell Wilson has had this year. He looks like a broken man. He looks like a broken quarterback. that I'm concerned if it's beyond repair. And I don't know what coach you bring in order to fix him. I don't know what coach you bring in to fix this locker room, because this locker, it's not just Russell Wilson. This locker room as a whole just looks completely fucking broken. So I don't know who the right guy for that job to fix it is. All of a sudden, a job that looked more than this job a year ago looked like a perfect job. You had the talent offensively. You had a really good defense. You had a quarterback. This was a dream job. This is a dream landing spot for a new head coach. Now it's like this, out of all the potential head coaching vacancies that we're going to have at the end of the season, this probably is one of, if not the least appealing all of a sudden. Because you have a broken locker room that's openly fighting with each other, and you have a quarterback who is viewed as a phony, viewed as a fraud, has fallen off completely as a quarterback, and that you're now having to pay a huge chunk of money to. So, and you can't get rid of him until at least 3 more years. So, all of a sudden, this does not look like an appealing situation for a new head coach. And I don't know who that right guy is. So, it's just, there's just no hope around this team. Who would have thought that at the start of this year that we would finish the 2022 season and say there is no hope for this team, and this just feels like a dead team that we don't know when or if they will ever get resurrected. It just feels like there's just constant negativity around this organization. And some of it feels beyond repair. And it's sad. It's really, really fucking sad to watch. It truly is. It makes me sad just even talking about it, so I'm just not even going to talk about it anymore. The last thing that I want to talk about real quick from this past week was the final game on Christmas, and that was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Arizona Cardinals, a game that had a lot more stakes to it than you might have thought. It was a game I live streamed here on YouTube. Fun stream for the most part. Kind of a boring game for the most part, at least in the first half. But the thing I want to talk about the most in this game is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are just not a good football team. They're really not. And I just don't want to see this team in the postseason whatsoever, because it's not just that they're bad, they're boring as well. And they're boring to watch. They play just so much bad football. Tom Brady just does not look like the Tom Brady of old. Like, Tom Brady, he threw not one but 2 really bad interceptions in this game. Both to Marco Wilson. And this Bucs defense was kind of just letting, they didn't let up that many points once they got in between the 30s, but Trace McSorley and the Cardinals offense was just kind of moving the ball at will in between the 30s, to the point where it was kind of concerning. And yeah, this was a game that the Cardinals were up by 10 late in the game. The Bucs drove down, scored a touchdown after not doing jack diddly shit all day. The Cardinals they had the ball, they were running the ball effectively, they were killing as much clock as possible. And then they fumble. They fumble, and it bounces perfectly to William Golston. Bucs take over, they drive down, kick a game-tying field goal, game goes to overtime. And in which the Bucs eventually drive down, couple drives after overtime, kick a game-winning field goal. They escape with a win and put themselves in a position where all they have to do next week is beat Carolina, and they have the NFC South. And God damn it, I don't want it to happen. Because this, like I said, this is one of those teams that just does not deserve to play in the playoffs. They just don't. This is not a good football team in any way, shape, and form. And let's just call a spade a spade. This team got lucky on Christmas night. They got fucking lucky. There's no other way to say it. And it's sad because they're playing against a Panthers team who just kicked the shit out of one of the hottest teams in football, the Lions. A team that's been playing really well. A team that already beat the Bucs earlier in the year. And that game, really, it's a situation of whoever wins that game basically wins the NFC South, essentially. And because, like I said, the Panthers hold the tiebreaker over the Bucs. So, and to me, it's like you have a Panthers team that has not played well for most of the year, but as of late, they've played really well. Steve Wilkes, I think, has done more than enough to show that he should be the head coach of this Panthers team next year. Sam Darnold's even played as well as he possibly can. This running game has been stellar. When they get that running game going with Deontay Foreman and Chuba Hubbard, that run game has been stellar for them. Like, there's a lot of things that you look at with this Panthers team right now that you look at and you're like, hey, man, they're probably not going to win a playoff game, but they at least have shown some signs where it's like, all right, this team can at least be deserving. They have some really great guys on the defense. The defense has played much better than I thought. Brian Burns has still been really good. J.C. Horn, unfortunately, I think broke his wrist. It sounds like his season's done, which sucks because he's been stellar this year. There are a lot of things that you look at this Panthers team. It's like, all right, their record shows that they're 6-9, but this team has shown that they are at least they're somewhat deserving over this last month that they've shown that they are somewhat deserving of being in that spot for a playoff spot. Not for a home game necessarily, but at least deserving somewhat of a playoff spot. The same cannot be said for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this Bucs team, I saw it in person. I've seen it all year. This Bucs team has just found ways to shoot themselves in the foot constantly. And yet they've also had equally as many times where they've kind of been bailed out a lot of times and gotten extremely lucky a lot of times. Sunday was a great showing of that. Had that fumble not happened, the Bucs don't win that game in my eyes. Because the Cardinals on that drive were just moving the ball so effectively. They were running the ball so effectively. And the Bucs just for some reason couldn't stop them on defense on that drive for whatever reason. And they got bailed out from a pitch that got bobbled and it bounced perfectly to a Bucs player. Perfectly to a Bucs player. That's lucky. That's luck. I'm sorry. It's luck. But yeah, I think realistically, this Bucs team's probably going to win this division, though they really don't freaking deserve it. Granted, I don't want to say any team in this division really deserves to win the NFC South, but this Bucs team in particular really doesn't deserve it at all because they've just been playing bad and boring football. That's all I got to say on that. And that is all that we have for the show today. Once again, if you haven't already and you'd like to, please like, subscribe, and share this video if you enjoy this content or you know somebody else who does enjoy this content. Also, if you haven't already, go follow me on Twitter at DDS_pod and go support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Double Diesel Sports. The link to those will be in the description down below. With that being said, I am Double Diesel. Peace.